Sorry, the lowest level of gearing in the last decade that you've announced, but the second highest in the sector.
Indeed, but...
Yeah, indeed.
Now, is this the best amazing Thames Water takedown by Barry Gardiner of Alistair Cochran, joint interim CEO of Thames Water, Sir Adrian Montague, CBE, and chair of Thames Water, and Cathryn Ross, joint interim CEO of Thames Water? Well, that's up to you guys. Also wait until the end, where Alistair Cochran feels the full ire of Barry Gardiner for being incredibly shady about one of his questions. Get your popcorn out, guys.
Yes, Mr. Cochran, you've painted to my colleagues a very good picture of the state of the company at the moment. But in May of this year, JP Morgan's report said it had poor financial performance. You've been the finance director, finance officer for since 2021. Weak operational performance, a stretched balance sheet. It talked about the enforcement cases coming from Ofwat and portended stricter Ofwat dividend policy coming in the future. 151 of your staff you've now chosen to make redundant. That was on the 20th of June, just a month after that report. Are they paying the price for your failure?
I think we have been very clear, indeed on Monday when we released our results, that our operational and financial performance wasn't where it needed to be. We've been very transparent about that. We know we need to improve performance for our customers.
You haven't been transparent about that for the past 2 years, have you, since you've been financial director? Let's look at the figure that you discussed with my colleague earlier, £14 billion of debt. I think actually note 18 of your account shows that your borrowings are 15.7 billion. How does that reconcile with the 14 billion that you were talking about earlier?
So 14 billion, just to be absolutely clear, is our statutory measure of net debt.
Net debt.
For covenant calculation purposes, which is what we report in terms of gearing, it's 14.7 billion, and that takes account of what is called debt accretion, the additional costs for hedging, inflation, and other risks.
That was 14.5, isn't it?
14.7.
I thought 14.5 takes the form of your whole business securitization, a structure that you've used to borrow against your highly regulated assets.
So a net debt on a covenant basis is 14.7. That, as I say, compares to get to the 77% of gearing, which is the lowest level of gearing in the last decade that we announced this week.
Sorry, the lowest level of gearing in the last decade that you've announced, but the second highest in the sector.
Indeed, but...
Yeah, indeed. And the Ofwat, when you were regulating Ofwat, or controlling Ofwat, Ms. Ross, I thought you said that the ratio should be 60%. Not 77, not 80. Is that not the case? You said it should be 60%?
Well, the 60% gearing that we were using when I was at Ofwat, and in fact Ofwat's been using right up until the last price review, is the notional level of gearing that Ofwat uses to input into the formula that it uses to determine the weighted average cost of capital.
So did you recommend 60%? Yes, you did, didn't you?
No, we were using a 60% assumption for the purposes of calculating the weighted average cost of capital in a price control.
So you weren't concerned at all that at that period the company had over 80%?
Our view at the time, and I will fully acknowledge that views have moved on, but our view at the time was that a company's choice of capital structure was a matter for the company itself and that the shareholders bore the risk of that. Now, obviously, views have moved on since then. That was the view at the time.
Right. So now that the views have moved on, what discussions have you had with the government on the potential nationalisation of your company?
None.
None. Why do you think it's being talked about in the press so freely?
Well, I can say that over the last couple of weeks I've read a lot in the press. Some of that was rather more outlandish than perhaps we would have liked. I think.
Well, one of the things that may be outlandish, maybe Mr. Cochran can come to this, is the way in which you structured, £560 million of debt, just in the case that the government should have to take over the company. Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Cochran?
Which debt are you referring to?
This is the amount of money that would be payable from your debt should the government the government would have to pay £560 million off to your debtors.
I don't recognise that figure, but...
I think what Barry's referring to is when Mr Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party and there were manifesto commitments to...
I think I'll say it in my own words, Chair. Thank you
Barry.
very much. Okay. There was talk about the nationalisation of the water company at that time, but actually since then public opinion's moved on. Public opinion has actually gone from 79% of people opposed to nationalisation now to 83% because of the way in which your companies have been failing to meet the public's expectations. So nationalisation seems to be a pretty popular thing amongst the public, and maybe that's been referenced in the press. But my question is about the way in which you included a clause in a previous debt issue that would require the government to immediately pay off around £500 million of debt in the case of nationalisation. You don't recognise that clause?
Don't recognise that clause, no.
Okay, in that case, perhaps you could... Sorry, Sir Adrian, you seem to want to come in there.
I was going to address the question of nationalisation very briefly.
Okay, if we can just finish off with Mr Cochran first. If you could write to us to tell us, in fact, was such a clause included in a previous debt issue? If it was, why was it? And what would the implications of that have been for the government? Thank you very much.
We'll do that.
Yes, Sir Adrian.
I was going to address your question on nationalisation. If you go back to the very dawn of the private ownership of these utilities, the rationale was to empower the utilities to borrow privately, to use private sector capabilities to drive performance through the operation of the utilities. We say that we have much more to do in that area. But I think the key thing is to remove from the Treasury the burden of funding the improvements to the water sector that we're now managing privately. And that was the driver of privatisation.
But the problem, Sir Adrian, has been that actually, although there has been substantial investment in the infrastructure since privatisation, I absolutely agree with you on that, it hasn't been enough, has it? And that's exactly the point of my colleague Mr Dunn's questions to your colleague earlier.
And indeed, we've got to increase the flow of that investment. That's what our refinancing package is aiming to do.
What your structure, the structure of the company, not when you were there, Sir Adrian, but what the structure of the company allowed was for an Australian bank to actually leverage the fact that you're a regulated asset to extract money out. Did it not?
Yes, I think that there was a flow of dividends from the company under previous ownership. It's, for us, quite a long time ago, Mr Gardiner. I think it reflected slightly different.
It reflects the state of the company now, doesn't it, Sir Adrian?
It reflects, I think, the state of what the markets were and the practices at that time. I can't.
Those practices are still going on, aren't they?
I can't.
Macquarie's doing the same in other regulated industries, and actually, you yourself, I believe, are on one of Macquarie's companies, Cadent, and actually, Cathryn Ross is on British Gas Transmission, aren't you?
National Gas Transmission.
National Gas Transition, which are both Macquarie companies. So it seems that there's a very cosy arrangement here.
I have to correct you, Mr Gardiner. They are not Macquarie companies. They have a range of international investors in them, including, in my case, Chinese and Qatari investors. They're all very responsible investors. They're all seeking to improve the performance of the companies. That is the case here. It was probably the case when Macquarie owned a major stake in the company. I can't answer to that myself. But this was ancient history, relatively speaking, ancient history for us, because Macquarie exited in 2017.
Well, you and I have a different definition of ancient, Sir Adrian. Thank you very much.
Reflects my...
Wow, bravo, Barry Gardiner. I thought you were absolutely brilliant. He took no nonsense from, didn't he? And, just brilliant. I was just mesmerised. I didn't want to spoil it because I just thought it was just brilliant. Sorry for my excitement there, but I just thought Barry Gardiner was absolutely brilliant. But anyway, do you remember this question and this reply?
151 of your staff you've now chosen to make redundant. That was on the 20th of June, just a month after that report. Are they paying the price for your failure?
I think we have been very clear, indeed on Monday when we released our results, that our operational and financial performance wasn't where it needed to be. We've been very transparent about that.
Well, clearly Mr. Cochran was being very shady with his reply and clearly didn't want to go there, did he? Well, the chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee and Tory Robert Goodwill decided to go back to this question, and his answer seemed to be quite a bit different to the one he gave to Barry.
Mr. Cochran, you talked about 151 redundancies. Are those going to be voluntary redundancies? Could you give an assurance? Because obviously there will be people working in the company who will be worried about their jobs and their future. Will there be compulsory redundancies, or are you confident you can fill those redundancies with either early retirement or voluntary redundancies?
To the best of my knowledge, we haven't announced a redundancy programme.
Right. I think the figure I saw was 151 redundancies.
As I say, to the best of my knowledge, we have not announced a redundancy programme. In fact, we have been hiring people consistently. In fact, for example, we onshored our customer service facing team into the region as part of our turnaround plan and continue to insource activity so that we can get an operational grip on our business to help part of this turnaround.
I see Barry's championing.
Mr. Cochran, why, when I mentioned that earlier, did you not immediately say that? I'm astonished.
I'm delighted to be able to
You
clarify
missed the
now.
point when we talked about it earlier?
Missed that part of the question, I'm sorry.
Okay. Anyway, we put the record straight. So,
Sorry, Chair, if I may, just one further thing, and that is, given that inflation is going to rise and your interest on your debt is going to rise, is it the case that prices are going to go up for customers?
Indeed, under the regulatory model, prices are indexed to inflation.
So why is it that you and others, indeed in Ofwat, and indeed in government, have been saying that there is no possibility that bill payers will see their bills rise?
I think if anybody's said that, that is not...
It's a government minister, actually, I think, as well.
I mean, the regulatory settlements are done on a CPIH plus
Well, indeed, yeah.
basis.
We all know your interest payments are going to go up. This is what's precipitated the problem.
Yeah, but
so the question is, how much are they going to go up? What do you actually foresee the rise that your customers are going to have to pay as a result of your company's failure?
Actually, our customers are paying less than they otherwise would as a result of the poor operational performance of the business, because we are in penalty territory in terms of Ofwat's incentive regime. Now, that means that the penalties we pay actually translate into lower bills than would otherwise be the case for customers because we're not delivering the service.
So we want companies to fail in order that bill payers don't pay as much. Is that what you're saying?
No, but the view is that customers should pay for the service that they receive. We haven't been providing the level of service that customers expect, and therefore we shouldn't charge them the prices that we would otherwise have charged them.
We're talking about the interest payments on your debt leading through to a rise in the bills that your customers will pay. Is that the case?
No.
No.
No, there is no mechanism within the current price control to enable us to put up bills to reflect higher interest payments.
And so your bill payers can rest assured on the assurance of the co-chief executive of the company that the financial difficulties that you've got yourselves into will not result in their bills rising.
Now, I got the feeling that Mr. Cochran, when first asked, clearly paused as if to say, I would rather not answer that question to Barry Gardiner the first time, and was rather hoping that the question didn't get risen again. But what do you guys think? That's my opinion. Also, what do you think of Barry Gardiner's absolute brilliant roasting? I thought it was absolutely brilliant, but let me know down below. Also, if you've made it this far and enjoyed this absolute roasting, just give us a like. Always helps. And if you're new to the channel and you like stuff like House of Commons and Select Committee meetings, subscribe. What harm can it do? So I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.